Hi, our topic today is using questionnaires, and it's part B. Part 1 of this we discussed last time, and some of the things we discussed, to recapture, I'll explain so that you can recall what we discussed. We started with the objectives of the lesson, and that was about ethical issues in designing a questionnaire. And then we moved on approaching the planning of a questionnaire and types of questionnaire items, different types of questions, some sensitive questions, etc. In this part, we'll discuss some other types of questions which can be included in any questionnaire, and then we will move on to discuss some of the pitfalls or the mistakes commonly made by the novice researchers, and after that we'll discuss some of the ways where piloting the questionnaire can help to avoid some of the problems which may lead to any kind of mistake or any kind of blemish on your research. Let's discuss the remaining 4 types of the questions which we couldn't cover in the last session. We were on ratio data questions, if you can recall, and there we discussed this example which you can see over here, that ratio data questions deal with continuous variables where there is a true zero. In other types of question types, there wasn't any value other true zero. And the examples of ratio type questions could be, how much money do you have in the bank? And of course it could be from 0 to infinity. How many times have you been late for school? If you ask a student, and there would be a continuous one. There won't be any answer which we discuss, for example, with reference to dichotomous type of question, yes or no. Here it could be any. And how many marks did you score in the mathematics test? Different people, different students would have scored different scores in the exam. How old are you right in years? This is another type of ratio question where different respondents may have different age. So what is the feature of ratio type of data questions? That here in this type of question there are no fixed answer to category provided, and the respondent put in the numerical answer that fits their figure. Well, there are further examples of this type of question, and these could be designed in the way you can see on the slideshow. Please give a mark from 1 to 10 for the following statements, with 10 being very poor and please circle the appropriate number for each statement. That is the language of the instructions, the language of the question. And the scale is that you have from the very poor on the one extreme and the excellent on the other extreme. So very poor would be 1 and excellent would be 10, and other points would be divided in between. The students and the respondents would be asked to give any value to these statements from 1 to 10. Number 1, the attention given to teaching and learning at the school. So where would you give the value? Where would you circle? You can circle anywhere from 1 to 10. Some could say 9, other may say 2, or some other may say 5. The quality of the lesson preparation, again from 1 to 10. How well learners are cared for, guided and supported in your institution. How effectively teachers challenge and engage learners, and how the educator's use of assessment for maximizing learners' learning, again from 1 to 10, and how well students apply themselves to learning, and discussion and review by educators of the quality of teaching and learning. These are some of the examples of the questions which can be framed under this type or this form, where the respondents have to give a value for 1 to 10. Now move on to another type of questions that is called open-ended question. If you recall, in the previous session we discussed, we rather started with comparing two types of questions in a questionnaire. One was closed-ended question, another type was open-ended questions. Open-ended question is a very attractive option if your research project is small, it's a smaller scale research, or for those sections of a questionnaire that invite an honest personal comment from respondents in addition to ticking numbers and boxes. And here I mean ticking numbers and boxes which we use in a closed types of questions. And up to here, whatever type of questions we discussed, they were one way or the other, were closed-ended questions. They were controlled by the researcher. In open-ended question, let's look at some of the examples and see how they are useful and where they can be used. What could be their purpose or function in research. Look at number 1 here, and you see, please indicate the most important factors that reduce staff participation in decision making. Please indicate the most important factors that reduce staff participation in decision making. So there won't be a tick type of questions or check type of questions. It needs to be elaborated and written in the form of sentences. In the same way, look at question number 2. Please comment on the strengths and weaknesses of the English course. So strengths and weaknesses need to be described in paragraphs again. Look at number 3, open type of question. Please indicate areas for improvement in the teaching of foreign languages in the school. So it is opinion. Respondents are asked to give their opinions, and for that purpose they can say anything, they can write anything, and as long and as much as they wish. So they are not restricted, they are free to answer their questions. So this is very important if the research is small scale and it is limited to a few number of respondents. And the purpose of this is to analyze a situation in depth. So rigorous analysis is the point, not the number in a large scale. Some modification in open-ended question is usually given in another form, and that is in the form of a sentence. An incomplete sentence is given to the respondents and they are asked to complete any way they like. So a sentence completion item is a useful addition to an open-ended question. An example of that one is here. Look at this. It says, please complete the following sentence in your own words. And then there are no options. It is open. But it gives the beginning, an effective teacher, and then enough space is given where the respondent has to answer. There is another example. The main things that I find annoying with disruptive students are, and there may be a list, 1, 2, 3, any number where the respondents can give. So it is a kind of a modification to the open-ended questions where some cue is given to the respondents and they complete it as they wish. Another type of question which is usually used in a questionnaire is a kind of a question which we'll discuss now. It is called matrix questions. So let me correct myself. It is not a type of question, but it is a type of layout or a type of a form. How the question is formed or laid out is the better way to describe these type of questions. These questions enable the same kind of response to be given to several questions. For example, strongly disagree to strongly agree. So the matrix layout helps in a way to save space, and an example of a matrix question follows. Look at this example where it says the language of the question or instruction is, please complete the following by placing a tick in the one space only as follows. 1 means not at all, 2 means very little, a moderate amount, 3 means a moderate amount, 4 means quite a lot, and 5 a very great deal. So how much do you use the following for assessment purposes? So there is no exclusively one answer. One may use a number of 1 and all of them are summarized in one table. Look at here, those numbers are given in horizontal in the form of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the boxes, and in the left hand column the options are given. How much do you use the following assessment purposes? For assessment purposes, how much do you use the following for assessment purposes? Number 1, commercially published tests do you use? are your own made up tests, are students' projects, are essays, are samples of students' work. So one can answer, one may use some of them, one of them, or all of them, and there is an option to give the answer. So this is a kind of a matrix. So it's not a very a different kind of question, but it is a kind of a form where the way the question is formed, it is laid out. Okay, then the next point related with the questionnaire are the types of questions which appear in questionnaires are the contingency questions, which are called filters and branches. So contingency questions depend on responses to some earlier questions. For example, if your answer to question 1 was yes, please go to question 4. So you will come across these types of questions. When you say yes to one, you are directed to go to number 10 or number 6. So the earlier question acts as a filter for the later question, and the later question is contingent or based on the earlier and is a branch of the earlier question. So that's why it is said contingency questions. Contingency means they are based on other questions and they are the filters and branches. So some questionnaires will write in words the number of the question to which to go. For example, please go to question number so and so. Otherwise, place an arrow to indicate the next question to be answered if you answer the first question was such and such. So basically it is referring to other part of the questions. If you choose one option, you are directed to skip some of the questions and attempt others. And if your choice is the other way around, so you skip other types of questions and go to a particular section to fill in. I will advise that there should be limited use of filtering and branching devices in the questionnaire. Such type of questions should be contingency questions. A filter of branching type of questions should be avoided. It is particularly important to avoid having participants turning pages forwards and backwards in a questionnaire in order to follow the sequences of questions that have had filters and branches following from them. We discussed in the previous session that you can't force the respondents to fill up the questionnaire for you. They will be doing a favor to you, and you know that time is important for everybody. So they are giving their precious time to fill your questionnaire, and if you think that they will feel at ease if your questionnaire is friendly and easy to read and respond, and if you make it difficult for them, and if they have to look backward and forward to filter out your questions, then it would be difficult for them, and it would be discouraging for them, and they might not fill it up they might give it up. So it is a particular problem, especially if you have these filtering and branching types of questions, that in internet surveys, if such type of questionnaire is used or questions are used in a questionnaire, there would be a problem, because in some cases the screen size is much smaller than the length of the actual printed page. So one way of overcoming the problem of branches is to sectionalize the questionnaire. So keeping together conceptually close items and keeping the branches within that section. Okay, the next important element or aspect which should be kept in mind while designing a questionnaire is asking sensitive questions. Researchers have identified several potentially threatening or sensitive issues, and they have suggested the following strategies to avoid them. One of them is open rather than closed questions might be more suitable to elicit information about socially undesirable behavior, particularly frequencies. So long rather than short questions might be more suitable for eliciting information about socially undesirable behavior, particularly frequencies. And using familiar words might increase the number of reported frequencies of socially undesirable behavior. And using data gathered from informants where possible can enhance the likelihood of obtaining reports of threatening behavior. And deliberately loading the question so that overstatements of socially desirable behavior and the understatements of socially undesirable behavior are reduced might be a useful means of eliciting information. So sensitive questions or threatening questions should be avoided, or anything which can offend your respondents could be minimized by following these guidelines. So with regard to socially undesirable behavior, it might be advisable first to ask whether the respondent has engaged in that behavior previously, and then move to asking about his or her current behavior. By contrast, when asking about socially acceptable behavior, the reverse might be the true. That is, asking about current behavior before asking about everyday behavior. So by sequencing and following this procedure, even the offending and sensitive questions can be used in a technical way. In order to diffuse threat, it might be useful to locate the sensitive topic within a discussion of other more or less sensitive matters, in order to suggest to respondents that this issue might not be too important. Okay, now let's look at some of the pitfalls in writing questions and how to avoid them. Although there are several kinds of questions that can be used, there are caveats about the framing of questions in a questionnaire. Let me say again. Although there are several kinds of questions that can be used, there are caveats, there are gaps, aporias about the framing of questions in a questionnaire. How you frame the questions in a questionnaire there are certain hitches, and some of them, some important ones are leading questions. So you need to avoid leading questions. And what's the meaning of a leading question? The questions that are worded, are their response categories presented in such a way as to suggest respondents that there is only one acceptable answer, and that other responses might or might not gain approval or disapproval respectively. So leading question is basically directing the respondents to answer in a particular way. So that's why it is called a leading question. I'll give you an example. Maybe it will be clearer. Look at this question. Do you prefer abstract academic type courses or down-to-earth practical courses that have some payoff in your day-to-day teaching? Look at the vocabulary, the words used, and they are leading because they are taking sides. By using do you prefer abstract academic type courses, look, the word abstract and an academic type of course, and comparing to the practical courses and the word used down to earth. And the most important element, that they pay off in your day-to-day teaching. So this type of question is leading the respondents to go for the practical types of courses. So when you design your questionnaire, you need to avoid such types of questions, I mean the leading questions. Then you need to avoid highbrow questions, even with sophisticated respondents. An example of a highbrow question is, what particular aspects of the current positivistic interpretative debate would you like to see reflected in a course of developmental psychology aimed at a teacher audience? Look at the type of vocabulary used. Your respondents may not be familiar with this terminology or convoluted language, positivistic interpretative debate, and developmental psychology. So you need to avoid such type of jargon or specialized terminology which only you or other researcher can understand, but not ordinary people. Then you need to avoid complex questions. And I'll give you an example of a complex question. Look at this question. Say, would you prefer a short, non-award bearing course, 3, 4, or 5 sessions with per day release, for example on Wednesday afternoons, and 1 evening per week attendance with financial reimbursement for travel, or a longer non-award bearing course, 6, 7, or 8 sessions with full day release, or the whole course designed on per day release without evening attendance? So it's complex. So many ideas in a very complex, in a convoluted type have been packed into this complex sentence. So it's better to break them down into short sentences instead of using complex sentences where different ideas are mixed up and it will be a burden for the respondent to unpack the information encoded such type of sentences. Then avoid all types of irritating questions or instructions while designing your questionnaire. Some examples of irritating questions or instructions are: have you ever attended an in-service course of any kind during your entire teaching career? The way this question is framed basically irritates, annoying for the respondent. It considers the entire teaching career. Have you ever attended? So such type of question should be avoided. Such type of language should be avoided. Look at the second question. It states, if you are over 40 and have never attended an in-service course, put one tick in the box marked never and another in the box marked old. So if you are over 40 and have never attended, so don't use such an irritating, annoying language in your questionnaire in designing or creating questions. Then avoid questions that use negatives or double negatives. Example of negatives and double negatives is, look at this question: how strongly do you feel that no teacher should enroll on the in-service award-bearing course who has not completed at least 2 years full-time teaching? Or, do you feel that without a parent-teacher association, teachers are unable to express their views to parents clearly, unable to access? So negative type of question should be avoided. Then avoid too many open-ended questions on self-completion questionnaire. Already discussed that if they are very, very important, just include 1 or 2 open-ended questions. And the reason we discussed in the previous session was it is not only hard to code or to analyze, it is very hard to make any themes, find the themes and categories for open-ended type of questions. Then you need to avoid extremes in rating scales. And extremes like the adverbials or intensifiers like never, always, totally, not at all. Also avoid pressuring or biasing by association. For example, do you agree with your head teacher that boys are more troublesome than girls? So don't use any biasing. Do you agree with your head teacher? Avoid statements with which people tend either to disagree or agree, that have built-in skewedness in which natural biases in the population affect the sample results. And finally, avoid ambiguous questions or questions that could be interpreted differently from the way that is intended. The problem of ambiguity in words is intractable. At least it can be minimized rather than eliminated. So take the following example. Does your child regularly do homework? So what does regularly mean here in this sentence? if he works once a day, is it a regular, or once a year, or once a term, or maybe once a week? So it's not clear, it is ambiguous. So it's better to avoid any language that is ambiguous, any phrases or words which could have more than one meaning. Another example of ambiguous question is or ambiguous language is, how many students are there in your school or in your college? If you ask this question, it is ambiguous. Why is it ambiguous? It is ambiguous because what does this mean by how many students are there in the college? Does it mean that how many of them are enrolled? What about those who are enrolled but they are absent? Or they are marked as absent, they are marked as present but they are out of college, maybe on a field trip. At this precise moment, it means the students, how many students are there in the college at this moment or this week. There being a difference in attendance between a Monday and a Friday, where people have to leave earlier for the longer weekends, or between the first term of an academic year and the last term of the academic year, because in those cases some of the students may have left the college or they might have started employment, and others might have gone home for revising for examinations, or they might have completed their studies or their courses. So any type of ambiguity which arises because of the language, it should be avoided. So ambiguous questions should be avoided, and ambiguous questions are those which have multiple interpretations, not one definite results, and they might be irritating as well for the respondents. So which answer should they give, and which meaning or sense they should take of it? I have developed here a task for you to check whether you have understood the concept of different types of questions. So I have put some 8 or 9 questions here, and I would like you to read this task and answer the questions. Think of any of the courses you are currently taking at ComSats, and try to answer the questions below about that course. What faults can you find in these questions? Well, they are taken from a questionnaire. It is adapted from a questionnaire, taken from different questionnaires rather, such type of questions. Can you see any problem with these types of questions? Question number 1 states, do you find your classes useful and interesting? What do you think? What's problem with this type of question? Do you find your classes useful and interesting? Yes or no? Well, this type of question is called a double question, because it's not one question. There are rather 2 questions embedded in one. When I say, do you find your classes useful? If the respondent finds the classes useful but not interesting, so what should he do? We should check yes or no. Or it could be other way around. Maybe you find the classes interesting but not useful. So again, there is no way to just tick one or both. So this is a problematic question. Do you find your classes useful and interesting? It's not one question, it is two questions embedded in one. And what's the solution? The solution is that this question should be broken down into two parts or into two questions. One, do you find your classes useful? And another question, do you find your classes interesting? That might solve the problem. Now you look at question number 2. Do you talk a lot in these classes? And the options given are a lot, a little, not much. So what do you think? What's wrong with this type of question, with this question? Do you talk a lot in these classes? Well, the clue is in a lot. So it's a kind of ambiguous question we just discussed, and it is ambiguous because a lot may not have one meaning for all the respondents. A lot could be anything. For people, maybe 6 classes would be a lot, and for others maybe 100 won't be a lot. So such type of ambiguous questions should be avoided in the questionnaire. Look at question number 3. It says, does the lecturer give enough opportunity for every student to express his/her own views in class? Does the lecturer give enough opportunity for every student to express his or her own views in class? Yes or no? What do you think? Is there anything wrong with this question? Well, there is. Does the lecturer give enough opportunity for every student to express? So what type of question you think we have discussed it falls under which category? I think it falls under the category of it's presuming, assuming. There is a biasness. It is understood in this questionnaire that it is a good thing for the students to express their views in the class. And it may also be taken as a leading question, because the researcher thinks that respondents should agree with him or her. Does the lecturer give enough opportunity for every student to express his own views in class? If the respondent thinks that it is not a good idea to express one's views in the class, maybe someone thinks that it's just a waste of time, that students are given that much time. And what about everybody should be given equal time to express their views? So if they don't agree with this view, what should they do? How should they respond to this question? So this type of question should be again avoided in the questionnaire. Look at question number 4. Say, do you prefer a friendly student-centered approach to a rigid teacher-dominated approach? It is clearly a problematic question. Did you notice what what's wrong with this questionnaire. Well, look at the language. Do you prefer friendly student-centered approach to a rigid teacher-dominated approach? So researcher has clearly taken aside that teacher-dominated approach is bad. It is rigid. And student-centered approach is friendly. So if you have a question like this, the problem is, it is a leading question, and the respondent would definitely take the direction, the clue that the researcher wants that student-centered approach should be taken as a good one. Now look at question number 5, which says, what qualification does your tutor have? Is there any problem with this question? What qualification does your tutor have? A diploma, or BA, BEd, or MA, MEd, or PhD? But the problem with this one is that students might not have that information. They might not have an access, an opportunity to ask the teacher. So it is a kind of a type of question which cannot be answered by the students, or students shouldn't be expected to have that knowledge. So it is a kind of a guesswork, or we can say it's a guess question. So what will they do with the guess question? Either they will guess it, or they will not answer it. And if they don't answer it, it will be problematic when you will be analyzing your questions. So such type of question should also be avoided. Now look at question number 6. If a student's utterance is linguistically deviant and peer correction does not occur, does the tutor usually give a non-metalinguistic response? So look at its phraseology. Student's utterance linguistically deviant, peer correction, non-metalinguistic response. First of all, it is a hypothetical question because it begins with if a student's utterance. So hypothetical questions should be avoided because as I discussed in the previous session and in the beginning of this session, that time is important, and you should realize that the respondents are doing you a favor, giving you a time. They don't have any time for puzzles or for thinking about the hypothetical questions, putting themselves in such a situation, imaginary situation, and give you an answer. So the problem with this type of question is that it is not only beyond the grasp or understanding of the respondents, it is loaded with a type of language which is highly difficult, in a sense that it is a kind of jargon, linguistically deviant, peer correction, and non-metalinguistic response. So it's a specialized type of language, and your respondent may not be familiar with that type of vocabulary. So when you make questions, you should stick to the easier and everyday use rather than specialized jargon. Look at question number 7. Which of the following causes you difficulty in the course? Understanding lectures, reading textbooks, writing essays. What's the problem with this question? Yeah? The problem with this is that this is not exhaustive. Which of the following causes you? If they all cause, and maybe none of these, there are some other causes, maybe listening, speaking, many others, they are not included in it. So this is incomplete. It is not exhaustive. All possibilities are not explored in this type of questions. Okay, the next is number 8. How much individual consultation with the tutor would you like to have for each assignment? What's wrong with this type of question? How much individual consultation with the tutor would you like to have for each assignment? And write it in hours. So again, there is a problem that how can you know what type of difficulty you will face, and you will ask your tutor to provide you. So for the respondent, this type of question would be hard to answer, because it is also guessing something where there isn't anything concrete to answer. It is also a kind of a question we discuss under hypothetical question. And finally, look at the question, what is your opinion of the course? So it is too wide a question. A respondent can write anything. So opinion about what? Its contents, its delivery, its interests. So there could be any answer to this one. So such broad type of questions which could have any answer should be avoided. So well done. You have looked at another way at different questions and analyze them, what's problem with them, and how to avoid them in using their own questionnaire. Well, questionnaire is just one tool of data collection. And whenever you make your plan for your research, you need to look at the alternatives, because you have to defend them in your viva and in your research. That why did you choose this tool for data collection, and why not other ones like observation or interviews or some other case study? So let's look at what are the advantages of questionnaires as a research tool. Well, the first advantage of a questionnaire is that it is more cost effective as compared to recording, where you need sophisticated kind of equipment and know-how to use it. For questionnaire, you have just a piece of paper and you just make a copy and distribute it. So comparatively, it is more cost effective. It is cheap to design, and there would be less money spent on it. You need limited funding for that one. The second advantage of using questionnaire to collect data is it's a geographically coverage can be wider and the numbers participating larger. What does it mean? Geographically coverage means that if you send it through, geographical coverage can be wider and numbers participating larger. Means that questionnaire can be sent through post and especially through the internet, any part of the world. It is easy as compared to interviewing as a data collection method, if you compare it with interview, where you have to personally go and have a face-to-face meeting with the people. In case of questionnaire, you don't have to do that. You can send it by post, and easiest way is through the email to a large number of people and in many different locations, many different parts of the world even. You don't have to go there physically. So geographically coverage is wider and the number of respondents or participants can be larger as compared to any other method of data collection. The third point, its advantage of questionnaire is that anonymity can be maintained and thus confidentiality can be assured. It's up to you. You can keep them anonymous and you can keep the confidentiality a secret. That is the requirement of any research, that you are not going to share the information, personal information of the respondents with anyone else for any other purpose other than research. Another advantage of questionnaire is that both type of data, quantitative and qualitative data, can be collected through the questionnaires. Quantitative data, mostly the form of questions which we discuss as closed-ended questions, or closed type of questions will generate, and qualitative type of data will be generated by asking open-ended questions or open-ended type of questions. So questionnaires can collect both types of data. So that is another advantage of using questionnaires as a tool for data collecting for your research. As there are advantages of any tool, there are also related disadvantages. So what are the disadvantages of using questionnaires as a tool for collecting data? Well, first disadvantage of the questionnaire is there is a loss of control. Once you have distributed, it is not in your control how the respondents would take it and treat it. Whether you will get it back if you have sent it through the post or you won't. So you don't have much control. So it means that its validity is lowered. Second disadvantage of a questionnaire is that you can't follow. There is no follow through. and if you want to maintain the anonymity, and if somebody make a mistake, there is no way to go back, because you don't have the details or the contact number. The nature is to keep the anonymity of the respondents. Then the third disadvantage of questionnaire is that if there is a flaw in its designing, or there is a partly completed and some questions are not attempted, they left blank, that would create a problem for the analysis. And the fourth disadvantage of a questionnaire is that there is a low response rate, that questionnaires are distributed but all respondents don't send it back, or they don't return. So that is the fourth disadvantage. There would be others, but these are most commonly found in case of questionnaires. To overcome these problems, it's better to hold a piloting before you distribute the actual questionnaire. Piloting I referred to in the previous session. We'll discuss it more over here. And by piloting means that before you actually send the questionnaire, it's better you try on your friends or on some focus group which is representative of the population you want to send the questionnaire. Okay, some of the purposes of piloting a questionnaire are, we are going to discuss here. The purpose is to check clarity of items, whether all items or questionnaires are clearly understandable, and piloting shows that respondents understand it. Clarity of layout, they are not messy, cluttered. In some cases you say they are in the boxes, they are the statements and boxes, and they are not opposite to each other. They are out of sequence. Clarity of different sections, presentations, and instructions. All these would be tested before the questionnaire is actually sent to the respondents. Then the purpose of a questionnaire, a piloting of a questionnaire, is to gain feedback on appearance. How does it look like? Another purpose of piloting is to eliminate ambiguities, uncertainties, or poor wording that would be pointed out by the early pilot respondents. To check its readability, or to gain feedback on question type, their suitability, feasibility, their format, the open-ended or closed or multiple choice questions, they all be tested. Other purpose of piloting is to gain feedback on appropriateness of question stems and the options, and to generate categories for responses in multiple choices, or to generate items for further exploration or discussion, and to gain feedback on response categories. Piloting would help. Its purpose is to gain feedback on length timing, means when to conduct the data collection as well as how long it takes to complete, and each interview, questionnaire, coverage, ease of completion. So many things will be clear when you pilot it, and in response to pilot you may modify it before you send the questionnaire to the respondents. Other purposes of piloting is to identify redundant items, which are repeated items or questions, those with little difference or discriminity, to identify irrelevant questions, and to identify non-responses. People are not responding to them, so they are not easily understood, or they are misunderstood. So that's a point why people get confused. To identify how motivating, non-engaging, threatening, intrusive, offensive items are used, and they should be eliminated. Piloting also means its purpose is to identify sensitive topics and problems in conducting interviews, and to gain feedback on leading questions, and to identify items which are too easy or too difficult or too complex or removed from the experience of the respondents. And lastly, to identify commonly misunderstood or non-completed items. So if they are misunderstood and they are not completed by the respondents, they need to be eliminated, and that is the stage where you can eliminate after piloting. So piloting is very important in case of questionnaire before it is distributed to the respondents. Well, if you are interested in this tool of data collection, which is a very important tool, and you want to make it as part of your research, you need to read more about the questionnaires. One very useful book, and this presentation especially on questionnaires is based on this book. I've given a reference here. It is called Research Methods in Education, and it is edited by jointly written by Louis Cohen, Lawrence Mannion, and Keith Morrison, and its 7th edition is available, which shows its popularity. So I would recommend that you need to get hold of it and make a copy of it, and it's freely available on the net, especially its companion part. It has a companion website with this one. Some other useful websites can help you, especially in preparing, designing, and other information about different types of questionnaires, and their website addresses are you can see on the screen. Many more can be found through search engines, such as you type even in Google. Note, and it is very important note at the end, that questionnaire templates on the web may not be as useful a tool as you anticipate. What I mean, there are many types of questionnaire templates are available on the web, but they are not very useful. So don't just copy them. Try to make your own and learn it. That's the purpose. So that's it. We started this second part of questionnaire, and that was basically to discuss some other types of questions which we missed from the previous session, and then we moved on to discuss what are the ambiguities with the problems with some of the questionnaires, their language, and we need to avoid type of questions we discussed, especially in the task, that we need to avoid double questions, ambiguous questions, leading questions, presuming questions, and a list of other questions. And then we discussed the purpose of piloting and improving, refining a questionnaire, and then ended with certain websites, and especially one book, that is Research Methods in Education by Louis Cohen and others. I hope that you would have understood data collecting tool, questionnaire, and you will be confident in designing, planning, and using different types of questionnaires, different types of questions in your questionnaire, and avoid language ambiguity and the other complexities and the pitfalls which people do in designing their questionnaire. So that's that for today. Thank you very much for listening. Allah Hafiz.